What if the most powerful people on earth are not worshiping money, not worshiping power, not even worshiping themselves, but something far older, far darker, and far more terrifying than anything you've ever imagined? What if the ancient god that demanded child sacrifice thousands of years ago never actually went away? What if he just changed his address? Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you connects dots that go from the burning altars of ancient Canaan through the corridors of the Vatican, all the way to a private island in the Caribbean that the whole world now knows by name. This isn't a fairy tale. This isn't a coincidence. And by the end of this video, you're going to see the world very differently. Let's go back. Way back. We're talking about 3,000 years ago, maybe more. The ancient Middle East. A land called Canaan, roughly where modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria sit today. This was a world full of gods. Every city had one. Every mountain had one. Every storm had a name and a face. But among all these gods, one stood above the rest in terms of fear, in terms of power, and in terms of what he demanded from his followers. His name was Baal. Baal literally means Lord or Master in the ancient Semitic languages. He wasn't just one god. He was a title, a system. Different cities had different versions. Baal-Hadad, the storm god. Baal-Zebub, Lord of the Flies, which you might recognize as another name entirely by the time we get to the New Testament. Baal-Hamon, worshipped in Carthage, North Africa, was perhaps the most horrifying version of all, because Baal-Hamon didn't just want prayers. He didn't just want grain or cattle. He wanted children. This is not mythology. This is archaeology. In Carthage, archaeologists discovered a place called the Tophet, a sacred burial ground, or more accurately, a sacred sacrifice ground. Thousands of urns were found there. Each one contains the cremated remains of young children, mostly infants. Some scholars have tried to soften this, saying many of the children died naturally and were then cremated as offerings. But other researchers, looking at the bones more carefully, found evidence of children who were alive when they went into the fire. The priests called it Mok, a ritual dedication of the child to Baal. The Greeks and Romans who witnessed Carthaginian religion were horrified by it. And remember, the Romans were not exactly squeamish people. If the Romans thought your religion was too brutal, that's saying something. But here's where it gets interesting. Baal worship wasn't confined to Carthage or Canaan. It spread. Phoenician traders, a major maritime civilization, carried their religion wherever they went. Spain, Sardinia, Sicily, and Britain. Wherever Phoenician ships landed, Baal went with them. And the worship wasn't always done openly. Sometimes it went underground. Sometimes it wore a different mask. Now let's talk about the Bible, because it is one of our most detailed records of what Baal worship actually looked like and what happened when it infected a society. The ancient Israelites were constantly, repeatedly, and almost embarrassingly falling into Baal worship. Their own prophets couldn't stop screaming about it. Elijah challenged the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel in one of the most dramatic confrontations in all of ancient literature. Moses came down from the mountain and found his own people dancing around a golden calf, which many scholars believe was a representation of Baal. King Ahab married Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who imported Baal worship directly into the royal court of Israel. And the practices that came with it were dark. Sexual rituals, ritual prostitution, and yes, child sacrifice. The Valley of Hinnom, just outside Jerusalem, had a place called Tophet, same name as the one in Carthage. Not a coincidence. This was where, according to the biblical text, Israelites who had turned to Baal would sacrifice their children by fire. The prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel describe it with absolute horror. This place became so associated with evil and burning that the word for it, Gehenna, eventually became the Hebrew word for hell. Let that sink in. The ancient concept of hell, the place of eternal fire and punishment, took its name from a real valley outside Jerusalem where children were burned alive as offerings to Baal. But Baal didn't stay in the ancient world. Let's trace where he went. When the Romans conquered the ancient world, they did something very clever. They didn't destroy the local gods. They absorbed them. Baal-Hamon became Saturn. And Saturn, the god who devoured his own children in Roman mythology, had his own festival, Saturnalia, which, by a fascinating historical process, gave certain traditions to what eventually became Christmas. Again, not a conspiracy, just history. Religions absorb and transform each other. But here is where we need to pay very close attention. Because as Christianity spread and became the dominant religion of Europe, the old gods didn't disappear. They went into hiding. They became demons. Baal-zebub became Beelzebub, one of the princes of hell in Christian demonology. The horned gods of the old pagan religions became the image of the devil. And the mystery cults, the secret societies, the underground religious movements that kept these old traditions alive, they kept going. They just stopped using the same names in public. Think about the Knights Templar. Founded in the 12th century, officially a Christian military order. But when Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V decided to destroy them in 1307, the Templars were accused of some very specific things. Worshipping a figure called Baphomet, spitting on the cross, conducting secret initiation ceremonies. Now, maybe all of this was fabricated by a king who wanted to steal their wealth. That's certainly possible. But the accusations reveal something important. People in medieval Europe fully believed that powerful, secretive organizations might be conducting rituals that had nothing to do with Christianity, rituals that stretched back to something much older and much darker. The Templars went underground. Their successors, depending on which historian you believe, became the foundation of Freemasonry. And Freemasonry, for all its charitable works and handshakes, has always carried the shadow of suspicion precisely because of its secrecy and its use of ancient symbols that predate Christianity. The all-seeing eye, the pyramid, symbols that appear in Egypt, in Phoenicia, in the ancient world, and then somehow end up on the back of the American dollar bill. Let's talk about secret societies more directly, because this is where ancient religion meets modern power. The Skull and Bones Society at Yale University was founded in 1832. Its members have included presidents, senators, CIA directors, Supreme Court justices, and titans of industry. George W. Bush and John Kerry both belonged to it, and when asked about it during their presidential race in 2004, both of them, on separate occasions, said essentially the same thing. It's so secret I can't talk about it. The initiation ceremonies involve lying in a coffin, confessing your deepest sexual secrets, taking a new name, symbolically dying and being reborn. Students of ancient religion will immediately recognize the structure. This is a mystery cult initiation, the kind of thing that was practiced in ancient Egypt, in the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, and yes, in the cult structures that surrounded gods like Baal and Moloch. Skull and Bones is just one example. There's the Bohemian Club, whose members gather every summer in the redwood forests of Northern California for a 2-week retreat that includes something called the Cremation of Care ceremony. In this ceremony, the world's most powerful men, presidents, CEOs, heads of state, gather around a 40-foot stone owl statue. A priest in robes reads from an ancient script, and an effigy is burned at the base of the owl as an offering. The owl, by the way, is another ancient symbol connected to wisdom gods and mystery cults across multiple ancient civilizations. The official explanation is that it's just theatrical fun, rich men blowing off steam, a quirky tradition with no deeper meaning. But if a group of poor people in rural Mississippi were doing the same thing around the same kind of statue with the same kind of ceremony, we would call it something very different. Now we need to talk about the intersection of power and something that goes beyond ceremony and symbolism. Because the argument isn't just that powerful people perform strange rituals. The argument is that there is a culture within certain elite circles that treats the most vulnerable people, and especially children, as disposable, as objects to be used. And here is where ancient history crashes directly into modern headlines. Jeffrey Epstein. You know the name. But let's go through this carefully, because the full picture is important. Epstein was, officially, a financial advisor. But nobody could quite explain where his money came from or how he got access to the people he got access to. He owned a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James. He owned a mansion in New York that was reportedly the largest private residence in the city. He owned a ranch in New Mexico. He had private jets, including one that became known as the Lolita Express, a name that tells you everything you need to know about what allegedly happened on it. His social circle included Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz, Stephen Hawking, various Nobel Prize winners, and a cast of wealthy and powerful figures from finance, politics, academia, and entertainment. In 2019, Epstein was arrested on charges of sex trafficking of minors. He died in federal custody in August 2019 under circumstances that remain deeply controversial. The official ruling was suicide. But two of the most prominent forensic pathologists in the United States, after examining the evidence, said the injuries to his neck were more consistent with homicide than with hanging. Multiple surveillance cameras malfunctioned on the same night. Two guards who were supposed to be checking on him both fell asleep and later falsified their records. The mattress supposedly used to block the camera's view was never properly explained. Epstein didn't work alone. His companion, Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of the powerful and mysterious British media magnate Robert Maxwell, was convicted in 2021 of sex trafficking. The Maxwell family has its own deep connections to intelligence services, British, American, and Israeli. Many researchers believe that Robert Maxwell himself was a spy. He died in 1991 under murky circumstances, falling from his yacht near the Canary Islands. Here is the critical question that the Epstein case raises. Where is the list? Where are the prosecutions? Epstein and Maxwell were running what was, by all accounts, a blackmail operation. They were gathering compromising material on the most powerful people in the world. That material exists somewhere. Those people are known to intelligence agencies. And yet, with extremely few exceptions, none of them have faced any legal consequences whatsoever. Why does this connect to the ancient cult of Baal? Let me explain the argument carefully. The use of children in rituals of power is not something that historians invented. It appears across cultures, across millennia, in a specific pattern. It appears in contexts where a small group of people have achieved great wealth and power and are seeking to maintain it, where there is secrecy and initiation, where the violation of taboos is used as a bonding mechanism, where participants are bound together by shared guilt, and where the most vulnerable members of society, always children, always the poor, always those without protection, are the ones who pay the price. This pattern appears in ancient Canaan. It appears in ancient Carthage. It appears in certain Roman cult practices that were practiced in secret, even as Rome officially condemned them. It appears in the medieval accusations against the Templars. It appears in the satanic panic of the 1980s, which may have been partly hysteria, but which some researchers believe contained a kernel of truth. And it appears, in its most documented and proven modern form, in the Epstein network. The philosopher Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil, the idea that the most monstrous things are often carried out not by monsters, but by ordinary-looking bureaucrats and professionals who have accepted a system that dehumanizes others. What if that system has very, very old roots? What if it was never about believing in a literal God with a bull's head? What if Baal was always just a name for a particular orientation? The orientation that says, I am powerful, therefore I am exempt. I am above the moral law that governs everyone else. And the way I prove that exemption, the way I bond with others who share my position, is by participating in acts that would destroy anyone else, but that we can do with impunity. That is the real cult of Baal, not a religion in the conventional sense. A system of power that uses ritual, secrecy, and shared transgression to bind an elite together and keep them protected from consequences. Let's look at some more specific symbols and connections, because symbols matter. Symbols are how people communicate across generations without putting anything into writing that can be easily decoded by outsiders. The Owl of Minerva, the symbol used at Bohemian Grove, appears on ancient Phoenician coins. It appears as a symbol of Athens, the Greek city most connected to the mystery cults. A tiny owl also appears on the US $1 bill. Not the famous pyramid with the eye, but a different, smaller owl that requires a magnifying glass to see, hidden in the pattern on the top right of the front of the bill. Coincidence? Possibly. But when you are someone who studies these symbols, you stop believing in coincidences quite so readily. The owl of Athena was connected in ancient times to the goddess of wisdom, but also to the underworld. Owls were seen as psychopomps, creatures that escort the dead. In many traditions, they are omens of death. The owl in ancient Phoenician iconography was associated with night, with secrets, and with sacrifice. Now look at the logo of the Bohemian Club. It is an owl. Look at the centerpiece of their ceremony. It is an owl. Look at the ritual they perform. It involves an offering, a sacrifice, and the symbolic destruction of care, of conscience, of the thing that makes us feel guilty for what we do to others. I'm not saying the men at Bohemian Grove are literally worshiping Baal. I'm saying that somewhere in the deep history of these ceremonies and symbols, there is a thread that connects them to something very old. And whether the participants consciously know that or not is almost irrelevant, because the function is the same. The function is to create a group of people who are bound together by a secret, who have symbolically shed the moral constraints of ordinary life, and who emerge feeling that they are set apart, elevated, and exempt. That's what the ancient mystery cults did. That's what the rituals of Baal did. And the people who went through those initiations didn't think of themselves as evil. They thought of themselves as enlightened, having access to a higher truth, having been freed from the naive morality that kept ordinary people in line. Let's talk about Marina Abramovic. In 2016, her name appeared in the leaked emails of John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. He was invited to a spirit cooking dinner at her home. Spirit Cooking is a performance art piece that Abramovic created, based on the writings of Aleister Crowley, the self-described wickedest man in the world, who devoted his life to creating a new magical religion called Thelema that drew on ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, and occult sources. The Spirit Cooking piece involves writing on walls in pig's blood, references to bodily fluids, and imagery drawn from occult ritual. Now, Abramovic and her supporters insist that spirit cooking is purely art. That context matters. That is, when it is done in a gallery, it is art, and when done in private, it means something different. And maybe that's true. But here's what's interesting: the reaction. When these emails leaked, some of the most powerful people in democratic politics immediately panicked. Not because they had done anything wrong, according to them, but because they knew that any association with occult imagery, with ritual, with anything that could be connected to the ancient symbolic vocabulary of secret cults, would be devastating. Why would it be devastating if it were just harmless art? Because somewhere in the collective memory of ordinary people, the alarm bells still ring. Something in us recognizes this territory. Something in us knows. Let's go deeper into the symbol system that connects all of this. In ancient Mesopotamia, the civilization that predates and influences both Canaan and Phoenicia, there was a ritual called the sacred marriage, the hieros gamos. In this ritual, the king would symbolically, and sometimes literally, unite with a priestess representing the goddess to ensure fertility and prosperity for the land. Power was legitimized through ritual sexuality. The king's right to rule was connected to his participation in sacred sexual rites. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is well-documented ancient history taught in universities. The question that serious researchers ask is, did this tradition ever fully die? Or did it simply move from the public temple to the private estate? When Epstein's Island was photographed from above before it was sold, the most striking feature was a blue and white striped building with what appeared to be a gold dome and an owl statue on top. Blue and white stripes are used in the iconography of several ancient religious traditions. The gold dome is used across cultures to mark places of special spiritual significance. The owl we have already discussed, and the island was registered with a specific name, Little St. James. St. James, in religious iconography is often associated with initiation, with pilgrimage, with thresholds between worlds. Again, coincidence? Possibly. But the accumulation of coincidences begins to feel like something else. Let's talk about what researchers call the pedo symbols, specific icons that were identified by the FBI as being used by pedophile networks to communicate with each other. These symbols include a small triangle within a larger triangle, which in ancient religious iconography is associated with feminine divinity, with the sacred feminine mystery. A spiral, which is one of the oldest symbols in human art, is found in megalithic monuments across Europe and in ancient Phoenician and Carthaginian religious objects. The connection between these ancient symbols and their alleged modern misuse by criminal networks is documented, not invented, by law enforcement agencies. Why would predator networks use symbols connected to ancient religious traditions? One possible answer is that these symbols and these networks are not connected at all, and the use of ancient-looking symbols by modern criminals is just an aesthetic choice. Another possible answer is that there is a genuine lineage, that certain initiation practices and their associated symbology have been passed down through hidden channels for a very long time, changing their public face but maintaining their inner structure. Here is what we know for certain. We know that powerful people have always found ways to exempt themselves from the moral laws they impose on others. We know that throughout history, those in power have used secret societies, initiation rituals, and shared transgression to bind themselves together and protect each other from consequences. We know that the ancient cult of Baal involved the sacrifice of the most vulnerable, the children, as an offering to power. We know that Jeffrey Epstein ran a network that trafficked the most vulnerable, children and young women, for the gratification of the powerful. We know that almost nobody in that network has faced any meaningful consequence. We know that the evidence that would name names appears to have been suppressed or disappeared. And we know that this is not the first time in history that this has happened. The Carthaginians destroyed their own records before Rome could capture them. The Knights Templar burned documents before the French soldiers arrived. Robert Maxwell's intelligence files have never been fully released. Epstein's autopsy photographs are disputed. The client list has never been fully made public. Every time, throughout history, when this pattern emerges, power, secrecy, ritual, the exploitation of the vulnerable, the destruction of evidence, the same thing happens at the end. The powerful walk away. The vulnerable are forgotten, and the system that protected the powerful continues, underground, waiting for the next generation to rediscover it. That is the real religion of Baal, not a bronze statue in a temple, not a burning altar in a valley. A philosophy, a practice, a way of organizing power that says, we are the elect, we are above the law, and the proof of our power is that we can do what others cannot and suffer no consequences. And here is the final, most important question. Why does any of this matter? Why does it matter if some ancient cult has modern echoes? Why does it matter if the symbols on a private island echo the symbols in an ancient Phoenician temple? Why does it matter if the rituals of wealthy secret societies parallel the rituals of ancient mystery cults? It matters because understanding the pattern is the only way to interrupt it. Every single time in history when this pattern has been interrupted, when the prophets of Israel stood up against the priests of Baal, when ordinary Romans refused to accept the child sacrifices of Carthage, when modern investigators finally brought Epstein to trial, however imperfectly and however partially, it happened because ordinary people refused to look away. It happened because ordinary people named what they saw clearly, without flinching, and demanded accountability. The most powerful weapon of any secret system is the belief that it cannot be named, that naming it makes you sound crazy, that the accumulation of evidence, the historical parallels, the symbolic connections are all just coincidence, just imagination, just the paranoid pattern matching of an overactive mind. But patterns exist because someone created them. Symbols persist because someone chooses to use them. Networks survive because someone protects them. And the children who were sacrificed on the altars of Canaan 3,000 years ago and the children who were trafficked through Epstein's network in our own lifetime deserve more than our silence. The ancient priests of Baal told the people, "Do not look at what happens behind the temple walls. Do not ask what happens to the ones who are taken. Do not name the thing that you suspect. Be grateful for the rain, for the harvest, for the stability of the kingdom, and do not ask the price that was paid." The prophets of ancient Israel had one answer to that. They named the thing by its name. They stood in the public square and said, "This is what is happening. This is what it is called. And this is wrong. Not complicated. Not nuanced. Wrong." We are the heirs of those prophets. Every person who refuses to look away. Every journalist who follows a story that powerful people want buried. Every researcher who connects historical dots that the establishment says are unconnectable. Every ordinary person who looks at an island with an owl on top of a gold dome and says, "Something is wrong here. I don't know the full answer, but something is very wrong here." That refusal to look away is the only force in history that has ever successfully challenged the cult of Baal, by whatever name it wore in whatever century it operated. The patterns are real. The history is documented. The connections are there for anyone willing to look carefully and honestly. And the question is not whether the ancient religion of power and sacrifice still operates in the world. The evidence suggests it does. The question is what we, the people who are watching, the people who are paying attention, the people who are willing to name the thing by its name, what we choose to do about it. Because knowledge without action is just anxiety. Seeing the pattern is the first step. But the prophets of Israel did not just see the pattern. They spoke it, loudly, publicly, at personal cost. They made it impossible for ordinary people to pretend they hadn't heard. That is your role now. That is why platforms like this one matter. Not because any one video or any one person has all the answers, but because the act of naming, the act of connecting, the act of refusing to accept the official story when the official story doesn't fit the evidence. That act is the most ancient and most powerful form of resistance against the most ancient and most powerful form of tyranny. From the Valley of Hinnom to the island of Little St. James. From the burning altars of Carthage to the private jets of the super-rich. From the priests who told the people not to look behind the temple walls to the PR teams and the lawyers and the intelligence agencies who tell us not to ask certain questions today. The cult of Baal never died. It has just learned to wear better suits. And the first step to ending it is exactly what you just did. You looked. You listened. And now you know. Now I want to hear from you. What connection in this video hit you the hardest? Was it the historical documentation of child sacrifice in ancient Carthage? Was it the Bohemian Grove ceremony? Was it the Epstein Island symbolism? Or is there a connection I didn't mention that you've researched yourself? Drop it in the comments right now, because this conversation does not end when the video does. The most important part of any investigation happens when people start comparing notes. That's how patterns get confirmed. That's how the truth gets built. If this video made you see the world differently, then you already know what to do. Hit that like button, because it is the single most powerful way to make sure this kind of content reaches the people who need to see it. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the next video goes even deeper into territory that most channels won't touch. History did not stop being dark when we stopped paying attention to it, but it does stop having power over us the moment we refuse to look away. The truth does not fear investigation. Only lies do.